why don't we invite our political panel up here now? No politics aside. Choose left or right, doesn't matter. So I wanted to put an exclamation point on this morning before we go into lunch. And yes, there'll be a sumptuous buffet. Because as alluded to earlier, and obviously the elephant, or depending on your perspective, the donkey in the room, right, is this cyclical, certainly every 2 years, definitely every 4 years, and arguably not even every cycle, but perhaps maybe being filled in almost as a new core kind of component. Political advertising is to say it's a huge deal is an understatement. How much dependency in the ad sales part of stuff is that? I wanted to have 3 folks, all of whom are redheads, except yours truly. So watch out, everybody. To kind of sort of get us behind the scenes a little bit of sort of there's a bit of mystery to the political ad sales kind of thing, and an overdependence on it, which is an irony in broadcasting for sure. But I will say this too, right? In a world where broadcasting is now majority dependent, and this is by every single publicly traded station group that I've been able to divine the data from, retrans is primary in terms of the revenue stream. Advertising is now second, and sometimes minority second, and maybe a declining second, depending on the way you do the numbers and stuff. And as has been alluded to earlier, and as I've said in various conversations yesterday and today, that political stuff really can obscure some of the structural issues that might be going on, right? And when that tide rolls out post next year's election, what's going to be left, right? I mean, how much rottage might there be in the piers of broadcasting once that everything is great again year goes away, right? This is sort of the topic that we're going to talk about. I just want to quickly show, first of all, this is being sponsored by Pure Integration. The folks there are in the room. You should talk to them. They were talking about AI and the creative process, about how to monitor and or deal with the issues around the creative. And that's totally an issue in a world where AI might be driving that creative. And if sellers aren't necessarily aware of the creative that's running on their air. But now these are dark slides. I didn't know this was going to sort of be the case. However, we were going to be joined by, why can't I find his information here? John Link, yes, thank you, from Ad Impact, who could not join us kind of at the last minute, but he did provide some slides. And I don't know how they will translate here, but we had, there's some basically media spending data that is showing, and we can share these slides afterwards, but as you see these slides progress, you can basically see traditional media essentially starting to stagnate while digital media spend is accelerating at a feverish pace, right? This shouldn't be a surprise to anybody, but linear television is still very much a big deal, and maybe always every 2 years, seemingly, we have to have TV. We'll deal with the changes later. I want to get into all that stuff. So I'm just going to hand it over to the 3 of you to identify yourselves, what part of the political advertising landscape you are in now, where you have been. We'll start at the end, and we'll come all the way to me, and then we're going to get into it. And I'd like to use this as a little bit of a reveal behind the scenes about what this process, what this stuff is of political advertising for our audience. Redhead number 1.
All right, I'm Samantha Osborne. I'm the Senior Director of National Sales for EW Script. I oversee all the political sales for the enterprise, which includes our local, of course, our network, and our digital CTV. I also oversee a part of our office that does pay for performance, which is for our general market. My background's a little atypical. I've been with Script for 4 years, but my background's actually in politics and digital. I've worked at several digital agencies. I was on the Romney campaign running their political digital operations, and then I was the digital director for the 2016 National Convention and chief digital officer of the Republican National Committee. So my company took a risk hiring me, having never worked in broadcast before I started, but I do have an interesting POV from actually working on the campaign, which is the end advertiser, plus the agency, and now actually at a publisher.
Redhead number 2.
Hello, I'm Nicole Mead. I am the Senior Director of Political Digital Sales for Gray. I am new to the role. I've been in it 9 months. Prior to this, I was on the buy side, where I spent almost 20 years retail and then political. So I fell into political, not like Samantha. And I have worked on both sides of the aisle, the Republican and the Democratic side. And there's no surprise that we all buy and plan media exactly the same.
And Julie.
Hi, I'm Julie Keene. I'm a VP at GMMB. We're one of the top Democratic firms in the space. And my background is similar to Nicole's in retail. I started in retail and fell into political and started on the Republican side actually first, and then switched to the Dem side in 16. So you get a unique perspective, I think, when you come at it from both angles, on both sides of the aisle.
So let's start with that planning process, right? Enlighten the audience as to how these dollars get planned and then ultimately apportioned, and perhaps why and how they differ from CPG or local retail or quarterly planning kinds of cycles that the mainstream advertisers kind of deal with.
From a buyer's standpoint, in terms of budgeting, first and foremost, it comes from fundraising. So it depends on how much a campaign has. Whether that's on the issue side, we'll have more abundance of money, obviously. The candidate, it's all based on fundraising and how much they can come up with. And then we try and take a medium agnostic approach, because we're trying to be more integrative with our digital and linear teams in order to allocate those funds. Linear is still, like you mentioned, a huge piece of the pie for us. Though trends are changing over time, a voter is still an older demographic. Obviously, those are changing as time goes by, and especially when you talk about a midterm election, an off year, not a presidential. Even this current year that we just, election day was a couple days ago, that is an older crowd. So when you talk about a 55 plus that watches 5+ hours of television, you can't take linear out of the mix. So we're just trying to balance that, and obviously it is becoming more 50-50. We're moving towards that 50-50 mark.
Let me allow you two to answer that, but let me also add this little Molotov then. Is it so the television, the preponderance or the over-indexing, if you will, of television as part of the planning process, is that solely the viewing behaviors of older audiences, by the way, ignoring younger audiences, or is it inertia? Because it's just what's been done, and it's quick and fast, and people know how to do it in and out quickly.
Yes, and I also think, too, that a lot of the consultants, they're used to a GRP. And once they were able to adapt that and they look at, they're the ones making the spots. So they're like, in their mind, they know 1,000 GRPs, we're going to switch the creative out. So from a digital standpoint, now trying to be able to show them an impression-based to what would be equivalent to 1,000 points.
You're nodding your
I
head.
also think part of it is programming. Let's talk about sports and news. It sells for political, it always will. And that's, a huge upside for that. And, there's going to be games that run up before election. Well, they'll pay the highest rate because they want to run in that game. So there's a lot of legacy of that, too.
All right, so there are a couple things I'm hearing here. Number one is that the fluidity of money that's either in the bank or not in the bank or possibly coming and stuff, how real time is that? Or how much cushion do you have? Can you take liberties with doing stuff? You can't do stuff on credit per se. That's got to be a huge problem when the best laid plans can just fall apart because there's no money, right?
I can speak to that after having it do when back in the day when I was at the committee, when I had to raise money at small dollars for the digital department, it can fluctuate day by day. That's why it bought week by week, because that cash flow has to be managed very closely. Because there's influx depending on what happens. A single day where you're going to have a huge fundraising opportunity for a debate, a gaffe, whatever it is. So cash flow is really important. And there's also times where it stalls out, too. I think we've all been there when you had a bunch of reserves and all of a sudden they're canceled. And really, there's nothing you can do about it. If the campaign doesn't have the money, they can't spend it.
And it's why we're cash in advance, because, I mean, even from the agency side and the vendor side, not until it hits the account can we do this, because we don't trust it, which is harsh to say, but we have to cover our.
And I think a little insight is, a lot of our campaigns run Tuesday, we're weekly, right? So a lot of our campaigns run Tuesday to Monday cycle because that gives a campaign the weekend to really fundraise. And that's that push for the weekend so they can wire that money to us on Mondays. So we have it in-house, and that's, a big piece of that. And we also don't want our creatives sitting at a station or at any vendor over a weekend where it has the possibility of being leaked. It's a big piece.
How holistic is the process, would you say, from your perspectives, and is generally, right? I think we're kind of over-indexing on sort of the local components of this, and we'll dig into sort of what that means in a minute, but truly, how holistic is it where not only television, but all the sort of media touch points are basically considered in toto versus just TV first and everything else next? Like, give us a little bit of a sense of how well integrated the thought process is in terms of all multiple media touch points, or is it we don't have time to get sophisticated, we just got to get the tonnage out?
I can answer that from the buy side, and really too, now being on the sales side is looking at where I have coverage, where I have stations, what's the cable penetration, because that's a selling point for me. If you have low cable penetration, then I'm going to push my CTV. But from the buy side, I mean, I'll let Julie answer this too, but TV is always number one. It's just always the first thing. And now what I saw in 2022 was radio sort of came down, and now CTV is its own byline. Sometimes digital can just be on a completely different plan, but the CTV is starting to creep its way up right under broadcast.
And we plan video that way, is that we'll plan TV and CTV is right underneath it. And we are trying to be as integrated as possible, but some of the difficulties we have is determining whether that's digital or on the linear side. From an agency standpoint, we tend to have different commission bases based on linear and digital, which is why we run into some difficult challenges there, and we're looking for solutions in order to fully integrate that process.
All right, so let me unpack that for a second, because that's a very important point, right? So are you basically saying there's a bit of a misalignment in terms of what the agency model is versus what the candidates and or the buys actually need to be? I don't put you on the spot, but it sounds to me like there's a bias towards buy more TV there.
Well, there's a bias for more TV because they're paying less commission on it. But there's also a piece of the digital where there's more back-end work that needs to be done to execute a digital plan. So that's where our higher commissions are coming in than we have in TV. So there is a bit of a misalignment, but that process coming together, obviously we don't want to cut our commissions, and they're not going to come up on linear at this point, knowing that's going down anyways.
There's also, I think about this too, the public file, how powerful that is.
Why explain that, what the public file means? I don't think everybody fully
I would
gets it.
hope if you work in broadcast, you know what the public file is, right? We have to disclose everything because we're FCC regulated. The public file is every order is fully, has to be published within 24 hours so that you can fully see what was bought by a candidate issue of national importance, right? That is actually one of the strengths from the sell side, right? Because one side goes up immediately, the other side will follow, right? Especially candidates. If their opponent's up and they're buying X amount of points per week, they want to match that because nobody wants to lose that share of voice. So I think that's also a big part, that really push it on the linear side that we don't have on the digital side is that transparency and that drive of not wanting to be, out, especially your frequency, your ads are running like 4 to 1. No candidate, especially if they're in the market, want that. I will also say the bias that I see too is just why everyone dumps money on the cable news. CNN, Fox News, MSNBC, we see millions of dollars spent there, and a lot of it is because they just need to be there because the candidate wants it, or because the politician wants to be there, or they're going at a base play. I see that as inefficiency a little bit, but we all just know they just do that. And if you ask a lot of people at the agencies, they're like, yeah, strategically, we don't see there's an upside to it, but we have to do it because they need to see it. They want to watch Fox News at 9 o'clock and see a spot.
Okay, so you're saying there's a bias there of the advertiser, in this case the candidate, or the money behind the candidate, that there's a bit of an ego stroke, so to speak, or a desire just to see themselves in the proper places. Because the question to the normal person would be, aren't you over-indexing on news and just beating the same horse over and over again? And are there other audiences that to be found out there, perhaps via streaming and or other television programming, even sports, right?
Well, I think too, if you don't want to be the candidate that said, hey, XY is spending $500 million and we've bucketed it here, here, here. They want to make sure, just to Samantha's point, like they are on track with exactly, they kind of drive each other, if that makes sense. Like you spent this much, I have to spend this much. I think it takes a lot for them to step back from that and say, how else can we allocate all these dollars?
Let me ask you this then. Defining local, okay? Obviously local broadcast does well in terms of reach in a defined DMA. Obviously cable is another wrinkle in that mix, so it allows you to sub-DMA a little bit, right, based on zones and these artificial sort of geographies, if you will, right? But none are sort of maybe the perfection of, say, a direct mail, right? ZIP+4 and those kinds of things, and or certainly IP, which streaming essentially hints at, with privacy notwithstanding, which we don't have to get into at this point. I guess the question is, how precise, given gerrymanders of districts and the advent of data, shall we say, on all sides of the mix, how efficient, I hear efficiencies because that's what local media has largely driven, but is it efficiency with the level of specificity, or are we is there still waste in that process given that maybe the targeting is a little less than when we're buying an entire DMA and maybe it's not even in one's congressional district and it's a wasted impression?
Yeah, I mean, political is inherently local. Every 4 years we'll get a presidential election, but even that in itself, you'll find a national footprint there, but even that is actually local because you're really only talking about a handful of swing states that will go local and that advertising is bought on a market-by-market basis. In terms of, we talk by candidate. So when we talk Senate, we're talking statewide, and you'll go to the big DMAs. There's not a lot of waste. Congressional, we want to get targeted. I think you'll see more CTV these days for congressional candidates because of the lower cable penetrations and the need that they raise less money. So, it can be more targeted and more efficient for them to purchase.
Okay, so I hear two things in that, and I want to hear your thoughts on this. That sounds to me like local television is somewhat in a dangerous position, given what you just described, because of that lack of sub-DMA targeting. And what I thought I also heard in there was a decline or a lesser viewership of broadcast television. Is that fair to say? Did I extract that correctly?
I mean, it's less broadcast. Cable, I think, is where we're seeing, a decline, and we will always, like Samantha said, we will always buy Fox News and CNN and MSNBC. It's just somewhere we're going to be, and they want to see themselves on those stations. So the decline, obviously with broadcast, we're still looking for reach, but but on the back end with efficiencies, we'll try and be more targeted.
Well, I think as broadcasters, like, part of the story that I tell is, yes, the news is saturated in linear with the candidate and with the PAC money. Put it on the streaming apps of find the news viewer no matter where they are with video, whether it's desktop, mobile, the CTV app.
Agreed with that. I would think if you're buying, I think usually we all know the buys start with news, you start news only on broadcast. To me, it's why wouldn't you buy our CTV as well? Broadcasters, we all have CTV, not a ton of it, but we have it. I think there's huge upside for us, yes, cord cutting is happening. We all know the audience and broadcast is shrinking, but doesn't mean it's not growing elsewhere. And so making, sure we're getting that share on CTV as well on local to keep the political dollars within there. And I think the ones that are going to lose on that in terms of category, in terms of the whole media mix, is mail, a little bit of radio, I think especially after the pandemic, and cable.
And we've, just one last point, I've seen in talking to the agencies that a lot of broadcast buyers are now asking for the streaming in the linear avail. So when we send the XML, they want to see it because they look at it truly as the extension of the linear news buy.
Okay, that sounds like incrementalism to me. Okay, so, and that's either neither negative or positive, but it's probably more negative. But so let me ask, the question I was going to lead into then is, what is the inventory and how is it being packaged for you? Because you say streaming, right? It's on Ascendance. I mean, all the data shows it, right? There are two ways to do local and streaming, right? One is, as you're saying, is to depend on, say, the local broadcasters or even the local cable operators and their virtual MVPDs and that kind of stuff to show the growing audience and cover that for you, linear buy plus. The other way, though, is it completely goes end around any of those two gatekeepers in the local environment. And that's literally taking a Zip+4 cluster set and going to Netflix or going to Max or going to Disney Plus and saying, these are the audiences that I want, and I don't want the rest of them. There are pluses and minuses to both of that, but it sounds like the legacy approach may not only goes so far in what you're seeing.
Today.
Okay. So what do you see it, what do you want it to become?
Political historically has always been a category that is 10 years behind
Absolutely.
other categories. So I feel that, honestly, when I came to Gray, I was like, can I sell this? And then I looked at all the assets. To your point, yes, like I cannot get that many impressions on all my local streaming. But Gray owns so many other properties that we can then package in to make it worth sports, news, like to make it worth their while. And a lot of that is relationship driven.
Sure, and I think the hardest challenge we have with CTV too is we have to be agnostic to how it's bought. Programmatic, that is a big category. That's how people want to buy. So we kind of scripts, and I think Great doing the same thing. They want to buy programmatic, great. We want to make sure they have access to our inventory and the pipes are clear, so when they want to transact, it's ready to go, right? But we have no control over that necessarily when it's coming. It's not like the same thing. Oh, I just got an avail. I sent out my rates. I expect something could come. But we also want to be able to do I/O. We also want to make sure if someone's buying our station, they want to throw on some OTT. It can be in one order. We will do that too. We need to be nimble to whatever the agency needs in terms of how to buy. Because I think we all win if we can make it easier on the buyers. We're going to get more revenue out of that. So we don't want to be the cumbersome part of the process.
And everybody buys it so differently.
They do.
Okay, tell me about data, though. How much data are you given to play with, and how many partners are you seeing willing to take that data, do overlays and that kind of stuff, and either make the linear more intelligent, maybe even addressable in certain cable circumstances, or maybe enhance or augment a CTV buy because you've got the IP capabilities of doing that, or household level?
Yeah, I mean, for us...
Or do you not get data and it's just give me numbers, give me GRPs?
We are using ACR data to inform all of our buys, especially our incremental spend as we go. So we're making sure we're using that data to, increase reach for, voters that maybe aren't seeing our ads, or increase frequency that those are the low propensity voters. And then we also use ACR data to conquest and make sure we're combating misinformation. Or just if my opponent is serving a particular audience a lot, we will want to combat that and conquest it and make sure that our ad's being delivered so they're seeing both messages and can make an informed decision. So we're using that ACR data to make sure that we're targeted and we're using the incremental dollars that come in at the end, because with digital we can do more of that targeting. We talked about it. When we get so much money towards the end, it's kind of a fire sale. We're just dumping cash in daily. And when it comes to TV, you started with a strategic approach, and now you're just buying everything.
Okay, so here's sort of my last question then. How So you guys are all you're in the heat of battle, literally. I mean, you've seen this, you're in it, you know how the dials get done, and it's a skill. It's not unlike directing a TV show or a live sporting event and stuff. I mean, you know the skill, and it's got to be done with perfection, and it's really not something any amateur can do. Question is, at what point, either after the madness goes away or in planning before, or if ever, do you go back to your clients, your candidates, and generally and say, this process has to evolve and change because we can't do this dump scenario anymore. It's not, their audiences we're completely missing because they're not on television or even in streaming. When do you have those strategic conversations, or do you even have the opportunity to do so? And I'm asking from both the buy side and the sell side because I think they're both complicit.
I think from the buy side, it depends. When a campaign loses, they're gone. So, when we can talk to our consultants that we work with all the time that end up on different campaigns along the way, those are the most useful conversations. Bigger campaigns, like we did the post-analysis when we did Biden, so we're able to sort of extract what went well, what didn't work, and then reevaluate as we're going into another election cycle, and then pass that along through the consultants. But again, it's a different beast, so when someone loses, they're gone. It's done.
That sounds like a post-mortem, though. What about proactively changing and involving the system? Is that possible? Can you do that? When will you do that?
I think about this, you're right about innovation in political, it's slow. In terms of our systems, I know there's a lot of folks, and if John here would talk about Potomac and how they're trying to buy system specific for political, it's really difficult. It's a very difficult undertaking. But I think some of the most important conversations, I'm just thinking from the publisher side, always come the first 6 months right after election where we can all pause and talk and get feedback of, hey, what can we do to improve our processes? And even internally, those are the key time because we're not as busy. But as we're seeing, we're getting busier and busier in odd years. It drives me nuts when people in our company think, oh, yeah, what are you doing this year? I'm busier than I was even when we're just transacting week by week because that's the planning side. That's where we can actually change things or improve things. And also get feedback, honestly, and then get to anticipate what the next challenges are. Because I feel like every political cycle, there's the thing. And sometimes it doesn't really impact broadcast. I remember text messages, when everything was all about the text messages. That was, we all had to acknowledge that. And that would be the topic of conversation in the political industry. Now it's AI. It doesn't really necessarily impact us because we're not making creative, so that's fine. Reaching frequency is something that kind of came up, so we're now understanding that that's a metric we're going to be asked about. But that's probably the key piece. It's just not being stagnant in those first 6 months right after election. Because once you get busy again, it's hard to pause and do anything else.
All right, Nicole, you get the last word on this.
I think it's even just a little bit more simple, and a couple people have said this. We have to make sure that it's easy for the buyer. So making sure the mundane things are set up. Do we have payment situations set up? What payments does everybody use? Everyone, because it has to, we have Repay, FastPay, whatever all their names are now, but all these prepayment companies, making sure that we're set up for them so they can get it. Talking to the traffic department, okay, can you get a spot on as quickly as linear? What's that process? Just simple things that if you drop the ball on one of those, they're going to be like, I'm never coming here again, because to Samantha's point, all of a sudden it'll be busy, and you got to be prepared.
Okay, well, it's going to get busy, and we're going to get busy with lunch, but I want to thank all three of you for giving us a little bit of an insight into the political side. Thank you very much.